As powerful as incisive questions are, using them well requires both skill and sensitivity. It's easy, especially when we first begin practicing, to fall into habits that dilute their impact, or even unintentionally block the very thinking we're trying to free. In this section, we'll explore some of the most common pitfalls to avoid when using incisive questions. These aren't about getting it wrong, but about learning to notice where our natural habits, like jumping in too soon, leading the thinker, or rushing the silence, can limit the process. By understanding these pitfalls, we can become more conscious, more precise, and more respectful in the way we ask. Because the true power of an incisive question lies not just in the words themselves, but in the quality of attention, trust, and patience that surround them. Pitfall 1. Coaching instead of questioning. One of the most common traps is sliding from questioner into coach. The distinction is subtle but critical. In coaching mode, we guide, interpret, or suggest. Have you tried? Maybe you should. Could it be that you're afraid of? These seem helpful, but they imply ownership of the other person's mind. In a thinking environment, your job is not to direct their mind, but to liberate it. When you notice yourself explaining, advising, or steering, stop and come back to curiosity. Ask yourself silently, what assumption is at work here? Then rebuild the incisive question from that assumption instead of from your expertise. For example, if you hear yourself wanting to say, why don't you just challenge your manager? Shift to, what are you assuming about what would happen if you did? This change moves the responsibility for thinking back to the thinker, exactly where it belongs. The effect is profound. They begin to generate their own clarity rather than borrow yours. So let's listen to an example of the first pitfall, coaching instead of questioning. Thinker says, I'd like to think about why I can't get my manager to listen to my ideas. The questioner says, maybe you just need to be more assertive. Have you tried setting up a one-to-one meeting and taking an agenda? This is classic coaching, advice disguised as help. The questioner takes ownership of the problem and moves from curiosity to control. The thinker's independence shrinks. They're being told what to do instead of being supported to think for themselves. The key point is this. The questioner's job is not to offer strategies, but to surface the assumption that's stopping the thinker from acting. So how do we fix this? Simple. We return back to the assumption. Corrected example. What are you assuming about what would happen if you asked your manager directly? This recenters the responsibility for thinking and opens the path to self-generated insight. Pitfall 2. Vague, liberating truth. A vague, liberating truth dilutes the incisive question's power. Statements like, I'm actually capable, or they probably respect me, are too generic to feel real. The mind cannot work with vapor. It needs something credible, humane, and specific. When you sense vagueness, slow down. Ask, what makes that true? Can you give me an example or a piece of evidence? As evidence surfaces, help the thinker crystallize it into a precise statement. For instance, instead of, I am respected, the liberating truth might become, my team consistently asks for my input when decisions get tough. That's believable, measurable, and emotionally grounded. The liberating truth should feel true enough to relax the nervous system and clear enough to guide action. When the thinker hears themselves say it and their shoulders drop, you know it's right. Let's provide an example of the second pitfall, vague, liberating truth, using the following dialogue.
I just don't feel good enough for the promotion.
But you are good enough. You're brilliant. Just believe in yourself.
With the pitfall of vague, liberating truth, this liberating truth is too generic and lacks credibility. The thinker can't feel it, so their assumption, I'm not good enough, remains untouched. The brain needs a specific, believable counter-truth, not a pep talk. A vague, liberating truth may sound positive, but it doesn't dismantle the underlying assumption. The repair move is to add evidence, make it specific and humane. For example, as a correction, what's the evidence that others already trust your judgment at work? With the pitfall of vague, liberating truth, this liberating truth is too generic and lacks credibility. The thinker can't feel it, so their assumption, "I'm not good enough," remains untouched. The brain needs a specific, believable counter-truth, not a pep talk. A vague, liberating truth may sound positive, but it doesn't dismantle the underlying assumption. The repair move is to add evidence, make it specific and humane. For example, as a correction, what's the evidence that others already trust your judgment at work?
They often ask me to review decisions before sending them up.
If you knew that your colleagues already rely on your judgment, what would you think about applying for the promotion?
Now, the liberating truth feels real and grounded. Pitfall 3. Rushing the silence. Silence is the oxygen of thinking, yet it's the hardest element for most facilitators to hold. After posing the incisive question, our impulse is to fill the gap, to restate, reassure, or paraphrase. But doing so interrupts the neural rewiring that's happening in that moment. When you notice the silence stretching, trust it. You can literally count your breath. 1, 2, 3. The thinker's mind is reorganizing itself around the liberating truth you've just offered. If anxiety rises or attention drifts, gently re-anchor the moment. What more do you think now, knowing liberating truth? That's all you need, then wait again. The deeper the silence, the deeper the eventual insight. Think of silence not as a gap to fill, but as the sound of thinking happening. Here's an example of the third pitfall, rushing the silence. Questioner: if you knew that your contribution was valuable, what would you say in tomorrow's meeting? 5 seconds of silence. Or maybe we should think about another question. What do you think your manager wants to hear? The mistake here was a lack of patience. The silence was doing the work the thinker was processing. The questioner's discomfort with quiet interrupted the unfolding insight. The moment of discovery was lost because presence gave way to impatience. The key call-out is that silence isn't empty. It's where the mind reorganizes itself. The repair move is to re-ask and wait. As a corrected example, if you knew that your contribution was valuable, what would you say in tomorrow's meeting? Stay silent, breathe, allow at least 20 to 30 seconds of pause. Take your time. There's no rush. The silence gives permission for deeper thinking to emerge.
Pitfall 4. Global focus. Sometimes the incisive question fails because the focus is too large or abstract. Asking, if you knew your ideas mattered, what would you do differently at work, may sound inspiring, but the mind doesn't know where to begin. It's like asking a camera to focus on the horizon. Everything blurs. Shrink the lens to this issue, this meeting, this choice. Ask, if you knew your ideas mattered, what would you say in tomorrow's strategy session? Specificity creates immediacy. The brain engages because it can simulate the scene. When you hear the thinker drifting into generalities again, refocus them. Let's apply that to a real situation. What's one example this week? The magic of the incisive question lies not in abstraction, but in applicability. Precision makes the insight actionable. Here's an example of the fourth pitfall, global focus. Questioner: if you knew that your opinion mattered, what would you do differently at work? The mistake here is that the question is too broad.
The thinker doesn't know where to focus, so the response will be conceptual rather than practical. Overly global questions dilute focus and rarely lead to real change. The key call-out is to make it concrete, local, and time-bound. Thinking flourishes within a clear frame. The repair move is to aim at a specific decision or action. So as a corrected example, if you knew that your opinion mattered, what would you contribute in tomorrow's strategy meeting? Now the mind can visualize the context, and the answer becomes actionable. Using theory of constraints with time to think, in the content of business transformation and driving change, this is why combining a system improvement methodology such as theory of constraints with time to think is so powerful. If we have done our work well in terms of using theory of constraints, we should have a much better idea in terms of what to change in the system and how to change it. But that does not mean everything is clear-cut. Logic can only take you so far. For example, there may be some extremely complex issues which are hard to break down and get alignment on. Sometimes we simply need to bring our additional wisdom into our thinking. Using theory of constraints helps us to ensure that when we have a challenging core problem in the system, we are not falling into the pitfall of global focus and our thinking cannot be focused enough.
Pitfall 5. Debate over who's right. Occasionally, the thinker and listener drift into argument. Who's right about the assumption's truth? The moment becomes adversarial. That's not really true. Yes, it is. This dynamic pulls attention from discovery to defense. Your job is not to win the debate, it's to restore inquiry. Step out of right versus wrong and move to effect and usefulness. Say, let's pause on who's right. What's the effect of believing this? Or, regardless of accuracy, is this assumption useful to your best thinking? This shifts focus from external verification to internal impact. The thinker can then evaluate the belief not by its factual correctness, but by its practical value. Once they see that the belief limits rather than supports them, the debate dissolves. They become curious again, and curiosity is the state where incisive questions thrive.
Here's an example of the fifth pitfall. Debate over who's right.
My manager doesn't trust me to lead this project.
That's not true. Of course they do. They told me last week you were doing great.
No, they didn't mean it. They've given all the big tasks to someone else.
The problem here is that the questioner fell into defending their view of reality. The moment shifted from thinking to argument, a battle over facts instead of insight. Debate collapses curiosity and puts the thinker on the defensive. The key call-out is that we can't argue someone out of an assumption. We must restore curiosity by exploring impact and usefulness. As a corrected example, let's pause on who's right. What's the effect on your thinking when you believe your manager doesn't trust you? And what would be a more useful truth that would help you think freely about leading this project? Now the conversation shifts back to reflection and empowerment. Every practitioner of incisive questioning will eventually encounter these 5 common pitfalls. They're not signs of failure. They're simply indicators that we've drifted out of presence. The good news is that each has a clear way home. To conclude this section, let's walk through them briefly, and as I do, think about which one shows up most often for you. The first pitfall is coaching instead of questioning. This is when our good intentions take over. We start advising, suggesting, or leading, all in the name of being helpful. But in doing so, we take ownership of the other person's mind. The moment we start trying to fix the thinker, we stop freeing them. The repair is simple. Come back to curiosity. Ask, what are you assuming? And return the thinking to where it belongs, with them. The second pitfall is a vague, liberating truth. We craft something that sounds positive, you're capable, you've got this, but it's too general to be trusted. The mind doesn't believe what it can't feel. The repair is to ground the liberating truth in evidence. Ask, what's the proof? Or when has that been true before? Make it specific, human, and real. The third pitfall is rushing the silence. This is probably the hardest for most of us. We ask the incisive question, and then, 5 seconds in, we panic. We fill the air with words because silence feels uncomfortable. But that silence is where the breakthrough happens. The repair, breathe, wait, and let the mind catch up. Remember, silence isn't a void, it's thinking taking shape. The fourth pitfall is global focus. Our question is too big, too abstract. Something like, if you knew your voice mattered, what would you do differently at work? The thinker doesn't know where to begin. To repair, narrow it down. This meeting, this decision, this week. Specificity brings thinking to life. And finally, the fifth pitfall, debate over who's right. This happens when curiosity slips into argument. We start defending our version of the truth instead of helping the thinker examine their own. The repair is to shift the focus from correctness to effect. Ask, what's the effect on your thinking when you believe that? Or is that belief useful? That question brings reflection back into the room. So coaching, vagueness, rushing, global focus, and debate, they all have one root cause. Our attention has drifted away from the thinker. Each repair is simply a way of coming home to presence, and that's the real discipline of incisive questioning. Not perfection, but awareness and the ability to return to attention quickly and gently every time.
As we begin to master the art of incisive questioning, it's easy to forget that the real power of this process lies not in the words we use, but in the quality of our presence. Every pitfall we've explored, coaching, vagueness, rushing silence, overgeneralizing, or debating truth, has one common root. The listener's attention drifts away from presence and into control. When we start coaching instead of questioning, it's often because we want to help, to speed things up, to guide the outcome. When our liberating truth is vague, it's because we've settled for something conceptually neat rather than something emotionally real. When we rush the silence, it's because we're uncomfortable with stillness. We mistake activity for progress. Global focus and debate are the same pattern in disguise. Our attention moves to ideas, not to the thinker's mind in this moment. The discipline of incisive work is to keep coming back to presence, to the thinker, to the assumption, to the truth unfolding between us. When we return to presence, we remember that we are not here to intervene, but to liberate. We're not trying to change the thinker, we're creating the conditions where they can change their own mind. So every time you catch yourself in one of these pitfalls, treat it not as an error, but as an invitation. An invitation to pause, breathe, and realign with the principles of the thinking environment: attention, equality, ease, and appreciation. From that place, repair becomes effortless. We return to the assumption, we refine the truth, we wait for silence to do its work. Because when we stay present, the question doesn't just change the conversation, it changes the thinker. So that brings us to the end of this discussion on incisive question pitfalls. Remember, the real skill in using incisive questions isn't about getting every step perfect. It's about staying present. When we resist the urge to rush, to advise, or to fill the silence, we create space for the thinker's mind to open on its own. That's where the power lies, in trust, attention, and respect. So as you practice, remember to avoid the pitfalls not by doing more, but by being more. The quality of your presence is what allows the incisive question to truly do its work. Thank you for watching. We hope to see you on the next series.